Imagine this. At a silent dawn, your eyes flick open, and the very first sentence that jumps across your mind is, "Another day I have to muscle through." You never voice it, yet it feels as though you've signed a contract with the air itself. Moments later, the bus is conveniently late. A colleague brushes past for no reason. The coffee machine mutinies again. Coincidence? If language were just air vibrating, why does it behave like executable code, forcing the whole world to conform to your gloomy script? Push further. Are you really the one speaking? Or is some hidden version of you hijacking your vocal cords to issue orders to fate? You might object, I'm only venting. But Jung reminds us, the unconscious has no sense of humor. Whatever it hears, it enacts. Nietzsche is sharper still, calling language a prison for thought, locking away your imagination of what could be. So, how can a prisoner hypnotized by daily self-suggestion ever hope to reach freedom? Zoom out, the entire city mutters in unison. So tired, no choice. Forget it. Millions of seemingly harmless lines weave an invisible web around streets, high-rises, and human hearts. They shed no blood, yet they bend GDP curves, chill housing markets, and set the era's ceiling of courage. Do you realize that each syllable you casually release is coding your future? If even your choice of words isn't under your command, whose authorship is your destiny? Here's the crux when your mouth opens. Who's really at the keyboard? This isn't rhetoric. It's a security prompt at the gateway of a life or death program. Are you ready to type the real password? Or will you keep clutching no choice as a lucky charm, summoning a feeble fate with feeble spells? Don't answer yet. Let your lips keep silent. Let your heartbeat speak. Instead, its rhythm is the Morse code in your dialogue with fate. The only question is, can you decipher it? Think back to the last time you stood in front of a mirror and rehearsed what you were about to say to someone who mattered. Maybe it was an apology you never delivered, or a declaration you swallowed at the final second. Notice how even in private you censored yourself, pruning sentences like a nervous gardener trimming thorns. Why? Because beneath the conscious layer, where you decide what to say, there is another workshop dimly lit, full of archetypal engineers, quietly forging every phrase before it reaches your lips. You call the result my opinion, but call it whatever you like. The blueprint is older than you, older than language itself. Carl Jung called those unseen smiths complexes. Each complex is a cluster of forgotten memories, cultural myths, and generational whispers welded together. They sit in the shadows, tugging at the strings of diction and tone, determined to keep the ego's story consistent. When a complex is triggered, the words that pour out feel spontaneous, but they are rehearsed lines in a drama written ages ago. I can't. I mustn't. I'm worthless. These are not statements. They are passwords granting the complex control over your behavioral operating system. Philosophy piles on its verdict. Schopenhauer, the gloomy maestro of will, insisted that the intellect is merely the will's lantern useful for illuminating paths the will has already chosen. Translate that into contemporary psycholinguistics, and it means, by the time you've framed a sentence, the decision that sentence embodies has already happened backstage. You are reading a teleprompter, believing you're improvising. Your sighs of resignation, your quick sarcasm, your polite self-deference at meeting speech, a pixel in a larger portrait. The will paints with ruthless consistency. Look closer at a single, everyday phrase. Sorry, I'm just not good at that. Harmless? No. The moment you speak it, your nervous system releases a subtle cocktail of neurochemicals that confirm a fixed self-representation. Inadequacy. Dopamine pathways nudge your behavior toward low-risk tasks. Serotonin levels dip just enough to dim the appetite for challenge. Cortisol lingers for an aftermath of quiet defeat. Biologically, the sentence writes a short-term script into synaptic connections. Repeat it often enough, and you carve a linguistic groove so deep that new experiences are forced to flow along the same channel, no matter how contradictory the evidence. Now widen the aperture. Social doctrine. Modern society, with its glowing screens and algorithmic shepherds, profits from predictable speech. Platforms reward the simplistic mantra, "This sucks. I'm obsessed. Can't live without." Because binary wording trains, binary clicks. The more you compress experience into catchphrases, the easier it is to herd you into predictable purchasing corridors and voting lanes. Language is not only thought's prison, as Nietzsche warned. In the 21st century, it has also become capital's cattle prod. Yet you keep telling yourself, words are cheap. Are they? Consider the placebo effect. Scientists observe that a mere verbal framing, "This pill will ease your pain," activates endogenous opioids in the brain, sometimes as powerfully as morphine. A phrase modulates neurotransmitters, dampens nociception, alters motor output. That is not cheap. That is neuroalchemy. Reverse the polarity, and you get the nocebo. This might make you feel sick. Identical sugar pill. Opposite outcome, because syntax flipped the biochemical switch. In both directions, the sentence precedes the sensation. Why does your internal narrator opt for the bleak script so often? One answer lies in evolutionary wiring. The Stone Age brain learned that negative predictions were safe. Overestimate the danger, survive another day. Problem: we drag that Paleolithic risk manager into an era where tigers are tweets and famine is FOMO. The mismatch breeds a constant murmur of self-protection disguised as pessimism. Better not. Probably won't work. People will laugh. Each sentence is a preemptive shield, but the cost is chronic contraction of possibility. Add culture's seasoning. In many languages, humility is encoded as social lubricant. You downplay success to appear likable. Fine until repetition morphs courtesy into identity. The Japanese concept of one, true feelings, versus tateme, public facade, illustrates the gap. Keep voicing the facade long enough and the boundary blurs. You forget which was mask and which was face. Your declared helplessness becomes actual helplessness, not because the world conspires, but because your neural adhesives congeal around the phrase. Do you begin to sense how deep the tunnel goes? Your words are ghosts of ancestral fears, alignments of neurotransmitters, conveniences of market algorithms, etiquette myths, neural heuristics. And yet, you insist, I speak my mind. Which mind? The one you curate on social media? Or the submerged parliament of complexes? The one you defend in debates? Or the lean reptilian sentinel scanning for shame? When conflicting choruses jostle for your tongue, who wins and why? Pause and notice the tension in your shoulders right now. That tension is a telegram from the body, reacting to intellectual dissonance. You are glimpsing the puppet strings. It is uncomfortable, even humiliating, to admit linguistic autopilot. But humiliation can be fertile soil. Nietzsche called it the prerequisite for becoming who you are. Only in the crater of shattered self-certainty can a new sovereignty germinate. Here is the cliffhanger. If the sentence, I am broken, can sculpt synapses, what could the sentence, I am unfinished, do? If one word can spike cortisol, which word could ignite serotonin? Before you test that, you must descend one layer deeper, into the chamber where silent assumptions dictate every syllable you will ever utter. There, in the echoing dark, lies the master switch. And reaching it requires confronting the invisible cost of every phrase you have casually loosed into the wild. Ready to see the invoice? Hold that breath, because the real price isn't measured in embarrassment or lost opportunities. It is measured in worlds never born, simply because they were never spoken into the draft of reality. Stop a moment and replay yesterday in your head. Not the headlines or the deadlines, but the side remarks, the half-muttered lines that slipped out when you thought nobody was paying attention. Figures I'd screw that up. Whatever, it won't matter. That's just the way things are. You shrugged and moved on. The words dissolved into stale office air, or scrolled past a handful of digital eyes, forgotten. Forgotten by you, maybe, but not by the machinery that registers every syllable like an entry in an invisible ledger. What ledger, you ask? The one that tracks probabilities, shaping which futures are statistically favored to materialize and which are quietly deleted before anyone notices their absence. You believe events are the bricks, and language is merely the cement that binds them. Reverse the metaphor. Language is the mold. Events are the plaster that reluctantly takes its shape. Speak defeat often enough, and defeat becomes the default aperture through which reality flows. The mechanism is more intricate and more ordinary than any conspiracy. It begins with a cognitive glitch psychologists call self-verification bias. The brain prefers feedback that confirms our declared identity, even when that identity is corrosive. Say, "I'm terrible with money," often enough, and your prefrontal cortex obliges by overlooking every instance in which you handled finances competently, highlighting the single receipt you misplaced, ensuring tomorrow's sentence sounds identical. What you name, you nurture. Neuroscience adds another twist. Repetition drives myelination, a insulating sheath that boosts signal speed along neural pathways. A frequently used verbal construction isn't just a phrase, it is a prioritized highway where electrochemical traffic can sprint unimpeded. Competing thoughts. Maybe I could learn budgeting must slog through backroads, potholes of doubt, red lights of unfamiliarity. In time, the asphalt of "I'm terrible with money" becomes a superhighway of 8-lane certainty, visible on fMRI as a robust neural network. That network then feeds back into the endocrine system, modulating cortisol and adrenaline release each time you open a banking app, ensuring your hands shake just enough to fumble the next transaction, validating the prophecy once more. But let's zoom beyond the single skull. Translate the same principle to a team meeting, a city council, national discourse. When enough mouths repeat, "We're powerless against the system," neural highways merge into cultural freeways. Collective pessimism metastasizes into policy inertia. Budgets for imaginative projects evaporate. Risk-averse managers redirect funds to safe incumbents. Citizens stop voting because it won't change anything. A sentence becomes a shrinking horizon. Take a sobering historical example. In late Soviet Russia, a common toast at kitchen tables went, "Za nashu I vashu beznadyozhnost," to our hopelessness and yours. On paper, it was dark humor, a micro-release valve. In practice, it midwifed a learned helplessness that dulled reformist momentum for years. Political scientists later charted how the phrase's prevalence correlated with dips in civic engagement. The empire didn't merely collapse from economic strain. It was also linguistically corroded from the inside, one defeatist joke at a time. Words ate steel. Now bring the lens closer again, to your private life. Imagine a kid grows up hearing a parent say, "Love always ends badly." That sentence seeps into the amygdala as a precautionary scar. Decades later, the kid, now adult, unconsciously sabotage promising relationships right before intimacy peaks, better to detonate the bridge yourself than wait for fate's artillery. Therapists call it anticipatory betrayal. Poets call it tragedy. Either way, the origin is traceable not to hormones or star signs, but to a handful of syllables vibrating across a kitchen table before school. Or consider the workplace. A manager who jokes, "We're a sinking ship, but at least the coffee's strong," may think he's bonding via cynicism. In fact, he is issuing a tacit permission slip for mediocrity. Subordinates lower their performance bar in small increments. Quality metrics slide. The prophecy gains traction. Exit interviews later cite low morale as the cause, never recognizing morale was linguistically assassinated months earlier. Sarcasm passed as harmless banter, but its compounding interest accrued until the bottom line bled red. At macro scale, the effect intensifies because language replicates virally. Memetic theorists describe phrases as replicators, vying for host attention. The catchier, shorter, and more emotionally charged the phrase, the faster it propagates. Negative valence accelerates spread, bad news travels, but bad phrasing outruns it. Social media algorithms, engineered to maximize engagement, detect the correlation between outrage and screen time. They amplify the sharpest, most alarmist wording. Planet is doomed. Democracy is dead. Everything is rigged until nuance is algorithmically unfundable. A civilization's thought spectrum is thus prone to extremes, not by sensors in dark rooms but by the aggregated battery drain of billions of smartphones. And you, scrolling, internalize the feed's cadence. Your next coffee shop complaint echoes a tweet you liked at 2 a.m., unbeknownst to you. Let's examine one particularly stealthy byproduct: goal atrophy. Linguist Benjamin Lee Whorf famously argued that language shapes thought. Modern research refines the claim: language shapes attentional bandwidth. When you habitually say, "I just want to get by," your attentional matrix filters out stimuli related to flourishing scholarships, mentors, skill-building workshops as irrelevant noise. The opportunity was literally invisible to you because the verbal filter pre-labeled it as extraneous to getting by. Multiply that by years, and your resume is a fossil record of sentences you never upgraded. We can trace socioeconomic stratification along linguistic fault lines. Studies at Stanford and the University of Chicago show that children exposed to richer, more optimistic vocabularies score higher on measures of future orientation at age 10, which predicts income 20 years later more reliably than parental wealth. Vocabulary is destiny's prenatal ultrasound. Yet the causal loop is double-edged. Impoverished environments breed constrained language, which breeds constrained futures, which reinforce impoverished environments. The trap is self-lubricating. You might insist, fine, words have power, but surely the real determinants are material capital, connections, DNA. Partially true, yet even those determinants must pass through linguistic gates to transfer value. Capital requires a business pitch. Connections bloom through conversation. DNA expresses via epigenetic cues triggered by stress or serenity, both modulated by what you tell yourself daily. Biology itself takes dictation. Harvard's Robert Sapolsky demonstrated that rhesus monkeys at the bottom of their dominance hierarchy showed chronically elevated cortisol, shrinking dendritic spines in the hippocampus. How was hierarchy reinforced? Primarily through vocalization, submissive squeaks versus dominant calls. Translate squeaks into human self-deprecation, and the neurochemical cascade looks strikingly familiar. Consider also the innovation tax exacted by sloppy speech. When teams brainstorm under the shadow of phrases like, "that'll never fly," or "we tried that once," potential breakthroughs are aborted preconceptually. The cost is almost impossible to audit, because you can't quantify an idea that never formed, a technology that never matured, a cure that never advanced from Sketchpad. The ledger of lost possibilities is invisible, but it compounds silently, like dark energy, expanding the universe of mediocrity. Language even writes history retroactively via narrative framing. Post-event explanations. We were destined to crash. It was inevitable they broke up. Nobody saw the crisis coming. Backfill randomness with teleological cement, giving the illusion that outcomes were foreordained. This narrative fallacy, Taleb, anesthetizes the mind against counterfactual imagination. If everything had to happen, why bother trying something else next time? Thus, a sentence not only forecasts the future, it also embalms the past, ensuring future forecasts remain grim. Pause here. Feel a subtle vertigo? That dizziness is your proprioception catching your cognitive scaffolding in mid-tilt. You begin to suspect that your everyday lexicon might be the single most consequential portfolio you manage, more volatile than crypto, more leveraged than real estate, accruing compound interest in neural circuits you'll inhabit for the rest of your life. Yet nobody taught you risk management for diction. No quarterly reviews for phrases in circulation, no firewall against self-defeating metaphors. You were handed language like hand-me-down, clothes-ill-fitting, maybe frayed, but hey, it keeps you socially decent. You accepted. And society colludes in the negligence. Schools drill grammar, not grammatology of power. Business seminars preach communication skills, but rarely audit the ontological assumptions smuggled inside slogans like market realities or human resources. Therapy sessions scratch the surface, reframe the thought without dismantling the supply chain that keeps manufacturing those thoughts in the first place. The deeper structural question, who benefits from a populace fluent in defeatist idioms, usually gets lost in token nods to capitalism or patriarchy before the hour runs out. Yet the ledger is indiscriminate. It records every micro-utterance. The sigh you release in traffic whispers to your limbic system, "We are trapped." The meme you repost, "Adulting is killing me," flags your subconscious with a bleak job description for life. The offhand prediction you make at dinner, "Bet this project tanks," nudges your micro-expressions toward doubt in the next stakeholder meeting, subtly sabotaging rapport, which then cycles back as confirmation. "See? I knew it would tank." The whole process unfolds subliminally, like a spreadsheet executing macros you never coded, but somehow signed off on. Here's the most disquieting part. Language has a half-life. Long after a phrase exits your mouth or timeline, residues persist. MRI studies show that reading a metaphor like "he had leathery hands" activates the tactile cortex seconds later. Now, imagine the metaphor is existential. Life is meaningless. Where does that echo land in the body? In cortisol spikes, immunosuppression, sleep cycle fragmentation. Biomedical journals now link chronic pessimistic self-talk to inflammatory biomarkers associated with cardiovascular disease. A sentence can scar lymphocytes. So, what now? Panic would be understandable, but unhelpful. Panic itself is a verbal construct. "This is terrible." That would only deepen the groove. Denial is equally futile. The evidence is neurological, epidemiological, historical. Awareness, then, is the minimal viable response, but awareness of what texture? Not sterile intellectual assent. "I agree words matter," but a somatic realization. Every utterance you chooses or allows a biochemical cascade, an attentional aperture, a probabilistic branch for the timeline called your life. Does that render you omnipotent? Hardly. External forces, random tragedy, systemic injustice can bulldoze even the most intentional language. But see the inversion. Because the external is unpredictable, your internal discursive realm becomes the territory where agency is both likeliest and cheapest to exercise. Words are leverage. High yield, low capital instruments for altering the trajectory of neurons, teams, cities. Ignore them and you forfeit the equity. You might still wonder, if the consequences are so colossal, why don't we feel them immediately? Because the system is buffered. Much like climate change, linguistic feedback loops have latency. A careless phrase today may not bill you until next quarter or next decade, when you realize entire categories of ambition calcified, unmourned. The delay breeds complacency, allowing you to keep speaking as though speech were biodegradable. By the time the invoice arrives, memory has faded. You blame genetics, luck, other people's treachery, anything but the half-serious sentences you scattered like dandelion seeds, now grown into thorny hedges. And so, here you stand, ledger in hand. The figures are abstract, but the deficit is palpably a contraction in the chest when opportunity knocks. A chronic sigh before emails, a muted palate on what could have been a vividly saturated life. These are the uncollected royalties of every empowering phrase you left unsaid. The compound interest on each doom-laden quip you did say. The grand total? Impossible to compute, but you can feel its gravitational pull, tilting your posture, dimming your pupils, narrowing the corridors of possibility, like walls inching closer in a nightmare you have not yet recognized as self-authored. One last unsettling thought before the next descent. If language can silently architect entire civilizations of despair, might it also blueprint cathedrals of daring? If so, the stakes are not merely personal, they are planetary. What new climate, social, or technological golden ages wait in linguistic limbo, hostage to phrases we have not yet dared to pronounce? Hold that question at the back of your throat, like a word on the verge of being spoken. Feel the tingling on your tongue that is potential quivering, impatient. But potential alone is inert. It requires articulation to explode into form. The lexicon you inherit is not your fate, but it is the raw material of your fate's forging. The inventory sits before you, like dormant code. Will you keep running the default script until its bugs crash the program? Or will you commence a radical rewrite? The password prompt from earlier still blinks, cursor pulsing. Enter new command. Choose carefully. The next sentence may not merely describe your future, it may seed its genome. You have stared long enough at the prison walls. Now your palms itch for a tool. Relief arrives not from outside rescue, but from an insurgency launched in your own larynx. The first shockwave is realizing rebellion can begin in a whisper. Anyone can march, smash, vote, donate. Few dare to rewrite the syntax that scripts those actions and preloads their outcomes. Yet that is precisely where insurgency is cheapest and most contagious. So let the uprising commence where tyranny's least expected, between tongue and teeth, in the half-second before vibration turns breath into syllables. 1. Draw the battle map. A meta-vocabulary audit. Start by weaponizing attention. For 72 hours, carry a pocket notebook or activate a phone mic if you trust silicon more than paper, and record every spontaneous phrase you utter about yourself, others, the day, the future. No editing, no shame. By sundown 3, you will possess a corpus more revealing than any diary because it bypasses conscious curation. Now perform a simple color code. Green for life expanding statements. I could figure this out. There's still time. Let's test it. Red for life contracting statements. Typical me. Nothing ever works. What's the point? Calculate the ratio. Most people discover an 80-20 tilt toward contraction. That data point is not a scold. It is coordinates for artillery. You cannot retake land you have not mapped. Next, zoom in on recurrent red phrases. Ask, whose voice is that? Trace each one to a source: father's sarcasm, teacher's ridicule, an ex, lover's contempt, a meme that went viral when you were 14. Put the origin beside the phrase. This single act often dissolves half the phrase's hypnotic power, because spells weaken when you expose the wizard behind the curtain. Jung called this withdrawing projection. Rebels call it identifying the collaborator on the inside. 2. Sabotage the sentence, but keep the truth. Merely slapping a positive sticker over negativity will not suffice. The unconscious sniffs out propaganda. Instead, practice linguistic aikido. Redirect the sentence's momentum without denying its data. Example. Original. I always freeze during presentations. Revised. Up till now. I've often frozen during presentations, and that shows me where I'm ready to evolve next. Notice the tweak retains factual honesty. I've often frozen to satisfy the inner fact-checker. Yet it sneaks in an open parenthesis pointing forward, ready to evolve. The unconscious, starved for closure, leans toward filling that parenthesis with neural rehearsal of improvement rather than rumination on failure. Why does this matter biologically? Because the amygdala tags novelty with heightened attention. When you inject a future opening clause up till now, next you convert a static memory into a dynamic prediction, rerouting neural traffic from the default mode network, ruminative loops, to the task-positive network, problem-solving loops. You feel a faint electric surge, micro-dopamine for the rebel's treasury. Practice until it becomes reflex. Each time you state an obstacle, tack on a comma and an infinitive of agency. And that shows me, which means I can. Therefore, my next step is, think of it as adding a secret door to every corridor that once ended in a wall. Over weeks, the cumulative effect is architectural. Your mental city acquires boulevards where alleys once choked. 3. Anchor words in flesh. The somatic loop. Language that stays in the skull is brittle. To forge phrases into unbreakable keys, bond them with the body. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio demonstrated that cognition divorced from somatic markers loses decision power. So pair each revised sentence with a sensoromotor ritual. Example. Sentence, I am unfinished and each breath is raw material. Ritual. Inhale deeply while raising shoulders. Hold 2 counts. Exhale slowly, while letting shoulders drop and palms open. Why? The motor cortex's activity during phrasing cements memory via embodied cognition. After 50 repetitions, the body itself becomes a mnemonic device. Slumped posture will feel discordant with the upgrade script, nudging you to self-correct before the phrase even forms. Historical rebels knew this. Stoic philosophers practiced premeditatio malorum, visualizing hardship, while controlling breath so their words about resilience fused with physiology. Martin Luther King Jr. has cadenced oratory married phrase to gesture, each rhetorical rise synced with chest expansion, transmitting conviction soma to soma across a crowd of thousands. Make it yours. Attach, I negotiate with reality. Reality negotiates back, to a deliberate finger tap on the wrist artery, reminding you of bargaining heartbeat. 4. Heartbeat. Over time, external chaos cues the gesture, which cues the sentence, which cues a neuroendocrine shift toward focused calm. That cascade is no longer random. It is choreography. 4. Form guerrilla cells. Microcultures of liberating speech. Insurgencies die in isolation. Language reform needs echo chambers of the opposite kind. Recruit 2 allies, a colleague, a sibling, a digital pen, Palantu, a no defeatist, phrase pact. The rules. When anyone emits a red sentence, another member gently flags it, offers an Aikido rewrite, and all parties repeat the upgrade aloud. Ridiculous? Consider Alcoholics Anonymous. Its power is not secret slogans, but communal call and response, reinforcing a new narrative around identity. I am an alcoholic becomes not a shame sentence but the opening of accountability. Your microcell operates similarly, but flips the polarity. We are sentence engineers. The social neuroscience angle. Speaking a belief to a peer activates the brain's social conformity circuits. We're wired to align expressed identity with group norms to avoid ostracism. Use that tendency. Normalize upward spiraling language until downward spirals sound as out of place as an obscenity at a cathedral altar. Within weeks, your trio's shared vocabulary nudges tone, which nudges mood, which nudges strategy. You've smuggled a semantic revolution under the radar of broader culture. Scale as desired. Create a Slack channel titled Syntax Hackers, a dinner table ritual where everyone shares one phrase they retired that day. A book club dissecting speeches that bent history's arc. Each cell is a linguistic greenhouse, incubating phrases evolutionary fit for courage. Seeds travel. Wind is generous. 5. Study the masters who spoke futures into being. Rebellion loves blueprints. Here are 5 exemplars whose tongue overrode circumstance. Epictetus, born slave. Become Stoic teacher. Key phrase, you may bind my leg, but not my will. He redefined locus of control so radically that Roman soldiers attended his lectures looking for tactical stoicism. The empire could shackle bodies. His sentence inoculated minds. Harriet Tubman, illiterate, by law yet multilingual, in symbolism. Key phrase reported by witnesses, my people are free, and I intend to see them. She used present tense prophecy, not future tense, to program an already completed timeline, fueling 13 trips back into slave territory. Reality finally capitulated. Nelson Mandela, after 27 years in prison, emerged saying, I stand here before you not as a prophet but as a humble servant. By demoting ego to servant, he neutralized retaliatory narratives, steering South Africa toward reconciliation rather than civil war. Syntax saved thousands of lives bullets might have taken. Viktor Frankl, Auschwitz, he repeated internally. They can take everything but the last of human freedom's choice of attitude. That sentence furnished enough psychological air to breathe until liberation, later crystallizing into logotherapy's core. Millions now inherit that oxygen. Malala Yousafzai shot for learning, she testified. Pens are mightier than bullets. Note the personification. Weapons possess might. Pens are might. A metaphysical equivalence, turning every classroom into armory. The Taliban could not outgun that grammar. The United Nations passed a resolution instead. Do not idolize. Reverse engineer. Identify the grammatical device tense shifts. Metaphor. Pronoun expansion. I to we. Test them on small frustrations, a delayed train, a brusque email. Mastery at micro. Scale prepares you for macro confrontations where stakes resemble history's crucibles. 6. Install feedback loops. Linguistic continuous integration. Software teams run CI pipelines. Every new code commit triggers automated tests to catch regressions. Replica for language. Each evening run a phrase retrospective. Ask, which sentence today uplifted energy? Which dragged? What environment cued each? Note patterns, perhaps fatigue triggers sarcasm, or authority figures trigger self-effacement. Adjust tomorrow's environment. Schedule high-stakes conversations post-exercise, endorphin buffer, or craft a cheat sheet of empowering microscripts to read before entering the boss's office. This is not obsessive, it is hygiene. You brush teeth twice daily because bacteria never quit. Phrases too accrue plaque. Every quarter, escalate. Choose one domain, finances, relationships, health, and audit its default lexicon. Replace static nouns with process-oriented verbs. Budget becomes cash flow choreography. Swap negations for affirmations framed by conditions. If this fails, I learn pattern X. Compile results into a linguistic changelog. Version 2.3 retired phrase, it's too late for me. Added phrase, time expands for focused work. Reading your own patch notes 6 months later is motivational nitroglycerin. You witness proof of neural refactoring. 7. Weaponize silence. Paradox. Sometimes the most radical utterance is none. Silence is not absence. It is gestational space where raw possibility coagulates. When an old red phrase strains to escape, I'll probably mess this up. Bite the tongue, inhale, count 3 heartbeats, exhale. The moment passes, the phrase dies unborn. Congratulations. You just prevented an entire micro-timeline from spawning. Do this often and silence becomes a firewall, giving conscious mind time to spin up an upgraded phrase instead. Monks have used mana, sacred silence, to rewire mental chatter for millennia. Adopt as needed. One tech CEO schedules a no-words hour daily. Employees converse via sketches. Productivity soared because complaint loops lost their feedstock. 8. Confront structural saboteurs. A rebel must not only tweak personal diction, but also interrogate contexts that monetize defeatist talk. Notice how certain apps autofill, I can't talk now, versus call you soon. One presumes avoidance, the other engagement. Hack settings or ditch tools that tilt negative. Campaign workplaces to replace post-mortem with after-action review, addressing gaps with amplifying strengths plus closing gaps. Small, language engineers culture over quarters. Yes, you will face pushback. Eye rolls. Accusations of toxic positivity. Remember, rebellion's early adopters sound delusional until metrics shift. Cite data teams using appreciative inquiry report 30% higher innovation rate and keep coding the culture. Every resistance is latent curiosity, wearing fear as armor. 9. Ritualize vision casting. Finally, graduate from phrase hacking to future perfect storytelling. Once a week, compose a one-page narrative dated 5 years ahead. I have just finished. We are celebrating. Our city now enjoys. Read it aloud. Record. Play back during walks. The grammatical structure tricks Broca's area into treating visions as memory rehearsal. Hippocampus tags it for consolidation. Reticular activating system starts scanning environment for resources matching the script. Athletes visualize. Entrepreneurs storyboard. Mystics pray. Same circuitry, different metaphors. Choose the one that thrills rather than bores you. If cynicism sneers, isn't this just wishful thinking? Recall earlier evidence. Nocebo can ulcerate tissue. If pessimism can injure flesh, optimism disciplined by action can sculpt reality. And discipline is the keyword. You must pair the story with micro-commitments scheduled in a calendar. Language opens the portal. Behavior crosses the threshold. Feedback fortifies belief. The cycle accelerates. Soon, momentum displaces willpower. You speak because you act. You act because you spoke. The cage rusts. Bar by linguistic bar. Feel the cuffs loosen? Good. But caution, liberation is addictive. Euphoria can morph into complacency. Many rebels stall at the first taste of agency, mistaking partial freedom for final emancipation. They upgrade sentences, yet cling to the meta-sentence. I must constantly fix myself to be worthy. That hidden premise spawns endless self-improvement, loops gilded cages replacing iron ones. To shatter the meta-cage, you must pierce a deeper paradox, where language itself bows to something older than words. That is the precipice we approach next. Pack lightly. You will need curiosity, a dash of nerve, and perhaps a silence you can trust. When you're ready, say the simplest command of all: continue, and we will step through the final door toward a truth that cannot be spoken yet insists on finding voice through you. Imagine you have climbed through every corridor of diction we have explored. So far, mapped the red phrases, practiced linguistic aikido, welded words to breath, recruited guerrilla cells, drafted future perfect stories. You feel lighter, stronger, oddly taller, as though syntax itself were helium in your bones. Then, just when you think you can speak the world into any shape, you encounter a final door. This one has no handle, no hinge, no keyhole, only a mirror-bright surface, reflecting nothing but your own gaze. On it, 3 words are etched in frost. Unsay the unsayable. Your first reflex is confusion. Unsay? You have spent pages sharpening speech into a blade. Now the blade is telling you to sheath itself. The mind protests. Language is my lever, why relinquish it? But protest is also language, and the door remains sealed. A deeper instinct whispers that this is not a contradiction but a koan, a riddle designed to shatter the final glass ceiling of self-authorship. 1. The paradox of final authority. Up to this point, every upgrade you implemented presupposed a central premise, that there is a you who commands words, and words obey. Helpful, yes, but partial. If you investigate with surgical honesty, you notice moments when the flow bypasses intention, slips of the tongue that reveal buried truths, bursts of poetry that arrive unbidden, laughter that erupts before thought can license it. In those moments, who authored the phrase? Neurolinguists call it spontaneous speech, sourced in the brain's default mode network, outside executive control. Mystics call it logos, the word that was in the beginning, older than any individual mind. Nietzsche glimpsed it when he wrote, I know my predecessors and my descendants. I myself am not contained between either. He sensed a current speaking through him, not merely from him. Here lies the paradox. You are both the architect of language and an eddy in a much older linguistic river. To master destiny through speech, you must also surrender to the current that carries speech into you. Authority is two-headed, deliberate craft and receptive silence. The final door demands you integrate them. Unsay the unsayable means quiet the deliberate tongue long enough for the deeper current to surface. Then, give it the microphone. 2. Silence as the mother tongue. Modern life treats silence as a deficiency to be patched with playlists and notifications. Yet every tradition of radical transformation, Zen, Sufism, hesychasm, Quaker worship, makes silence the crucible. Why? Because silence is the only medium dense enough to hold the unsayable until it coalesces into coherent vibration. Think of it as linguistic dark matter, invisible, yet its gravity shapes the orbit of every spoken atom. Consider a practical experiment. Schedule a vow of no. Output 24 hours without speaking, texting, posting, or even subvocalizing habitually inside your head. During that interval, note the sentences that clamor for release, complaints, jokes, explanations. You will discover that most of them are defensive armor, preemptive justifications to secure approval or avert judgment. When they cannot exit, they lose fuel, revealing the subtler murmurs beneath: an image, a felt sense, perhaps a single word glowing like an ember belonging, wonder, home. Those embers are fragments of the unsayable waiting for legitimation in your life, more primal than any red or green phrase. Break the vow after 24 hours. Speak only what aligns with the ember. You will feel the air vibrate differently, thicker, as though the world leans in to respect a rarer frequency. This is not mystical sentiment. Acoustic engineers measure that voices modulated by parasympathetic dominance, a byproduct of extended silence, carry more harmonic overtones, which listeners subconsciously interpret as trustworthiness. Destiny listens through human ears. 3. The confluence. Dialogue with the deep self. Having tasted silence, you are ready for the final craft. Deep self-dialogue. Sit with a journal. Draw 2 columns. Title the left deliberate voice and the right emergent voice. Inhale. Then let the deliberate voice ask a question it has wrestled with. What is my true work? Immediately silence the pen. Exhale and wait. Allow the emergent voice to respond, without censorship, perhaps a fragment, an image of hands shaping clay, a childhood memory of dismantling radios. Alternate questions and answers until the dialogue feels complete. What occurs neurologically is fascinating. Alternating engagement between executive and default mode networks forges meta-network integration associated with creative insight and resilience. Philosophically, you are staging a reconciliation between ego and logos. Practically, you harvest guidance unclouded by social conditioning. Do this weekly. Over months, you will curate a lexicon that is not borrowed from gurus or algorithms, but excavated from the geological strata of your own psyche. Words minted in that furnace carry rare authority. They cut through culture's static, like a lighthouse beam through fog. People notice, though they may not know why. They feel calibrated in your presence, like tuning forks resonating with a clear pitch. 4. The word that ends all scripts. Eventually, the dialogue converges on a single seed phrase. For some, it is, I serve aliveness. For others, nothing to defend. Or, love writes me. Mine cannot be yours. Discovery is non-transferable. This seed phrase is not a mantra to chant mindlessly. It is a compass, a binary star pulling every micro-decision into alignment. Test its power. Place it before a dilemma. Should I quit this job? Move to that city? And observe your body's micro-reactions. If the prospect accelerates heart and breath in a way that echoes the seed, phrase's vibration, you have resonance. Do it. If it deadens you, decline. Congratulations, you have installed a gyroscope impervious to external turbulence. But remember the koan. The seed phrase is provisional. The deeper current will one day exceed even this compass. When the phrase feels brittle, dare to release it back into silence and wait for the next evolutionary utterance. Language, like skin, must shed to stay alive. 5. Speaking the world anew. Now we arrive at the cinematic crescendo the whole journey has prepared for. Picture an ordinary Monday. Subway tremors, email avalanches, small talk about weather. Except you stand there tuned to a seed phrase born of silence, wielding words evolved through rebellion, aware of their biochemical, social, historical reverberations. You greet the barista with a sentence freshly forged, grateful you're here crafting warmth for strangers. The barista's pupils dilate, oxytocin spikes. She passes the warmth forward to the next customer. A ripple begins. In the team meeting, someone mutters the old script. This deadline is impossible. You intercept Aikido, flip. The scope is steep. Let's prototype one slice and prove feasibility by Friday. Cortisol levels drop across the room. Exec's risk assessment shifts. Project survives. Maybe births a product that later funds scholarships for kids who will coin new phrases that cure other impossibilities. The ledger updates in real time. That evening, news feeds howl crises. You do not deny them, but neither do you echo defeat. You post, "This is the century we discover governance as a participatory art link for local town hall calendar." 10 followers show up. One runs for council. Policy tweaks avert a housing crash. Butterfly effect? Perhaps. But remember, every civilization is a stack of sentences petrified into law and infrastructure. You are now a mason at the quarry where those blocks are cut. 6. The final reveal. Destiny is reciprocal language. Here is the truth that snaps the story shut like a book. Destiny is not a monologue, it is a duet. You speak. Reality answers in kind. When your speech is lazy, reality yawns back. When your speech is courageous, reality tests, then elevates you. When your speech is co-authored with the unsayable, reality bows because it recognizes its own voice echoing through you. Physicists whisper about participatory realism. Particles resolve into states only when observed. Linguistic rebels translate, possibilities resolve into futures only when named. The universe is waiting on your nomenclature. Not grandiose pronouncements, but precise, embodied, silence-tempered words. You are not a god commanding ex nihilo. You are a navigator issuing coordinates to a living sea that cannot resist answering its true name. If that sounds dizzying, good. Vertigo is the guardian of new altitude. Lean into it. Let the groundlessness remind you that every sentence is a wingbeat, and flight is sustained fall with style. 7. The curtain call. Picture the earlier Mirador again. The frost-etched command has melted. In its place is open sky, wide as the lungs of dawn. You step through, but there is no soundtrack of trumpets, only the hush of wind across an unwritten landscape. You inhale, feel language stir like a flock inside your chest, and smile at the simplest, oldest privilege. You may speak. You may keep silent. You may listen for the next phrase, gestating in the marrow of becoming. Whatever choice you make in that next heartbeat will seed or starve a universe. And now, unlike the day we began, you know exactly what that means. So the microphone is yours. The ledger is blank. The unsayable is humming. Take a breath. Write.